Good evening, everybody. This is the Oskar Quentin Evening Show, where we talk about sometimes more serious things than we get to talk about on TikTok Live. And because we talk about some more serious stuff, we don't broadcast this show on TikTok Live because their filters are pretty difficult to get around when we're talking about some important stuff. Tonight, the guest is Lee Stedman, who is somebody I cannot believe I was not following on Instagram because I've seen so many of his videos, and particularly during Metro Surge, I saw a lot of his videos educating me about what was going on in my city. Longtime viewers know how much I care about that. Longtime viewers know how much I care about the activists who are doing the work of keeping us educated about what's going on with ICE and some of the things that the federal government has been doing about those people lately. So I'm excited to get into this conversation. Couple pieces of housekeeping, which is that after the show, in about 2 hours, we will be doing the members only stream where you can come and just like ask me questions. Maybe crack a beer. There's a beer or two in the fridge. I don't know. We'll see. The more relaxed stream where we get to hang out and have fun. That's there after the fact, and there's links for myself and the staff and all that stuff in the description below, as well as Lee Stedman's link to his Instagram. But without further ado, I will unmute and turn on the camera for my guest and say hello. How are you?
Good. How are you? Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. I'll open it up to you. You heard the brief introduction I gave of you, but I want to give you the floor to tell people what you're about.
Yeah, for those that don't know who I am, I think I kind of rose to popularity a little bit on the public facing side of things during Operation Metro Surge, but the majority of my background is in like 10 years of community organizing experience split between like labor organizing and union organizing on one end, issue advocacy work around like climate change and open pit mining and pipelines, and then jumping over into like electoral organizing. Most of my background is specifically in coalition building, so trying to figure out ways in which you can get different community organizations and different organized groups within the community in general at large to be able to work together in order to effectively like amplify what they're doing. And that ended up getting translated over during the beginning of Operation Metro Surge, when after like jumping back and forth between the organizing world and being an outdoor educator and trying to figure out how to combine those two realms of my life, I realized that I wanted to get into either content creation or journalism as a way of like being able to tell stories, like use storytelling as a way to impact change and also be able to amplify the work that was being done. And just so happened that the day that I was heading up to the Twin Cities to practice interviewing my friends was the exact same day that Renee Good ended up being killed. And so I hit the ground running the next day, had no plan, did not know what I was doing, had no practice. So I just looked into the camera and started communicating things to the organizers that I was connected with online in a way that I knew would allow organizers to start prepping their own communities for response to what was going on, and just happened to take off with that. And through that leap of faith, kind of ended up on a journey of becoming a citizen journalist, and then more so a journalist or an organizer, through content creation based in journalism, trying my best to go and communicate everything I was seeing from a strategy and tactic perspective as an organizer as to what was going on during the crisis. So that's kind of a little bit of my background, at least.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of background. The first question that jumped into my head while I was hearing that is that you got on my radar during Surge, so I was going to ask like how much you were doing before that, but it sounds like had you made much content prior to that, or did you really just completely have this crazy coincidence of arriving right when the shit hit the fan here in Minneapolis?
Yeah, that's the funny thing is like, I started organizing in 2017 when I was still in college. I went to the Dakota Access Pipeline protest, and I was out there for a month and came back and just deep dived into coalition building as my like specific like subset of organizing that I just wanted to focus on. Like I was obsessed with it. And after like 4 years of doing that, I started to get burnt out, and I realized I wanted to do something more creative. And so I started experimenting with like the idea of creating this organization called Impulse, or not organization, but like media group called Impulse, that stands for Independent Media for Preservation, Unity, Liberty, Sustainability, and Equality. And like start interviewing groups of people within the organizing community and getting that out to the public. Find kind of like a precursor to all of this of what I wanted to do. And I kind of put that on hiatus after a month because I just burnt out. And then I moved to Minnesota and I jumped into the outdoor industry working at REI and then becoming a guide up in the Boundary Waters. And so I really haven't touched much content creation until the beginning of this year. I was in Alaska all of last year, which is where I am right now, working as a sea kayaking alpine backpacking guide after working in the 2024 elections. And, I was watching all the news come in about the rhetoric that was being established around Minnesota and specifically the Somali community. And I just knew that I wanted to come back and I wanted to do something with media in order to try to bring more attention to it. And it literally just happened that I came back. I was sitting there for a month trying to figure out like how can I jump into this? Do I go back to school for journalism? Do I practice just making content and see where it goes? And I ultimately landed on the idea of wanting to travel around the US interviewing Democratic Socialists and anti-establishment candidates who were running very progressive platforms about how their campaigns were going, and then bring that back to my existing like 4,500 followers online that were mostly like organizing connections that I have made over the last 10 years. And yeah, just jumped into it. It just all happened by circumstance that the day that I arrived in Minnesota was the day that Renee Good had been killed. And then, like I said earlier, I just jumped into it the next morning and then went 17 hours a day, 7 days a week for 60 days and kind of learned everything by trade in the process.
You gave me a lot there, because first of all, we're gonna put on the back
Sorry,
burner.
yeah.
No, we're gonna put on the back burner the fact that you were a Boundary Waters guide, because that gives us plenty to talk about, but it might not be so relevant for the purpose of this podcast. I've spent 2 or 3 weeks collectively probably up there. I like getting as far in as I can when I go in. So maybe we can talk about that offline. But I mean, really, the everything you just said brings me to what was the first kind of prepared question that we had, which is that you were a point of contact for a lot of people during Metro Surge, including myself, because I would see your videos and think, okay, that's what's going on. That's where I need to be paying attention. So for you having just arrived, I now know that you just got dumped into this thing right as it became completely chaotic. Like, what is the process for you to make sure that you're getting videos out there that are accurate and guiding people in the right direction? Because I would see those videos and think, I don't even know where people are getting this information. Then I'm making videos of people saying like, well, this isn't on the news. Where are you hearing it? And I'm like, I live here. It's kind of word on the street. Like, who are you following on Instagram? Because that's how we, it's like all through the grapevine, first canned accounts, and or a video from somebody like you who I just learned to trust because your content guided me in ways that were meaningful. So like, what did that work look like for you?
It was crazy when I was first getting started because again, like as I was saying, like I was coming up to Minnesota to practice interviewing my friends because I have a very eclectic group that lives in Minnesota, specifically between like different guides and people who have worked at REI, and then musicians on one end and organizers on the other end. And so I knew that I could get a lot of different content built and experiment with interviewing styles and then jump into like chasing that train of like progressive candidates that I wanted to be able to interview across like the US. And so when I got there, like the day after Renee Good had been killed, I immediately went to her memorial, and seeing all the media there, like I truly, I mean this in like the most literal sense. I had no idea what I was going to do at that point. I had my lavaliers with me. I had my camera with me. I'd been practicing framing and stuff on camera. But when I saw all of the media that was there, like I felt so self-conscious that I was like, anything that I say is most likely not going to matter to the majority of people because it's already being said, like the footage is already there. So instead, I just switched my mindset to like, okay, I have 10 years of organizing experience. This feels a lot like the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. I've been up against federal agents before. I've been up against private militias before. I've been up against surveillance companies and like tech companies before. Like I know what the organizing community looks like inside and out because I've worked at every single level of organizing, and I've been a director. I've focused on coalition building. I know that organizations are probably breaking up what their focus is. I know that the community is probably self-organizing themselves to respond to this. I know that wherever the sum total of federal agents are on the ground right now, there's most likely going to be protests in response. And my mindset within that was like, okay, I don't know what to do that's going to be effective for acting as a journalist, but I know as an organizer what would be effective for communicating to other organizers. And so when I started filming, I literally looked into the camera and I was like, okay, I'm just going to talk about this until my 3 minute cap is up. I'm going to talk about it in a way that I would to a friend or to another organizer, in the way that I hope I was going to be receiving information, thinking back to my time at Standing Rock and how I was getting all of my information from people live streaming on the ground and from Unicorn Riot and a few other like smaller independent media agencies. And I just wanted to be able to replicate their style with the way I usually go about communicating information, like behind the scenes between organizations. And that's just kind of what I did. And so, not knowing exactly how to go about being a journalist at the time, I more so was like, okay, let me start talking to people that are over at the memorial site. Let me get information. What's been happening since I've been out of Minnesota and up in Alaska? Where has ICE activity been at its peak? Where do they usually congregate? What agencies do we see on the ground? What tactics are they using? How are people organizing themselves? And through that information, I was able to go and and being able to communicate as an organizer and effectively know a lot of what was already likely happening. I was able to build connections really fast because I think people could tell that like I knew what I was talking about. And so I was able to get into signal chats pretty quickly. I knew what organizations to start reaching out to because I kind of had been analyzing the playing field of everything that was going on and picking out which groups are focused on what. Started trying to reach out to them and build connections. Reached out to the few organizers that I had been connected with over the last few years in Minnesota and asked them, like, where should I get plugged in? Where are you plugged in? And then I went over to the Whipple Federal Building with one other person I had met at the memorial who was a photographer and just started observing everything. Like, what stood at the back of the line of everything that was going on and just like watch, like, what are the federal agents doing and what is the community doing, and started breaking it down. And then once I got enough information as to what I was seeing happen and comparing that to like what I had seen previously happen in other spaces, especially like within the climate space and the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, started using that as what I knew I needed to go and communicate to the public. I saw a lot of people talking about things that were happening right in front of them, but not giving a lot of context. So I was like, let me pick out the things I'm not hearing from everyone else, and I'm going to talk about that specifically, so I can fill in the blank as to what's going on. And that's kind of was my whole process throughout the first part of it. And then as I got more deeply involved, then I kind of like, broke it up into different categories of what information do I think is the most effective to talk about. Let me talk about what the organizing efforts look like and how to get involved. Let me figure out CTAs or call to actions that I could go and push people towards. Let me outline the different organizations that are proactively engaged in the community so people know where to get plugged in. Let me talk about rapid response. And I joined like every signal group I possibly could in order to see where ICE activity was happening across the state. And then I would draft all of that up, break down where ICE activity had happened within the last 24 hours, and then use that to go and communicate like, this is where it's been happening and here are specific examples. And then I would kind of follow what I saw was happening between signal chats, other live streams, and just jumping around between areas of the cities that I knew were highly volatile, and just did on the ground reporting of like, okay, this is happening right now. Let me go figure out what's going on. Let me analyze it. Now let me communicate that. Or once I was on the ground, I'd start interviewing everyone offline in order to get as much information as possible, kind of do that investigative digging as to what are you seeing, what has been happening, how long has this been happening for, then using that to identify patterns and trends and different strategies that I assume that the federal agents were organizing themselves around. So we could then have that information be public. So organizations and community members involved in rapid response could hopefully respond faster and more effectively. Like that was my entire mindset throughout all of this. And then, as it went on, I kind of just like learned more by trade.
Yeah, I mean, you said something towards the beginning of that just like jumped out at me, which is that you have this
Yeah.
conversational approach that I, as somebody who has conversations all day with people about this stuff, I happen to know it's a good one. It gets people listening to just have like the friend telling you this stuff. But you said that you would talk for the 3-minute window that you're given, and that's
Mhm.
something that's impressed me about your content. Is I think that you've done you've done a lot more to look at this problem of like what information needs to go out to people, what's mainstream media missing. You said another thing I consider is sometimes I want to do coverage of something and then I see no, the news did an okay job on this one. I'm actually just gonna go, like send my efforts elsewhere. But you have to respect the 3-minute limit. For example,
Yeah.
there's a bunch of things that you have to do. I mean, I'm sure you're to some degree aware of things like how important those first few seconds of the video are in terms of it getting pushed and performing. Because there's these limitations that exist around. It's great that information we need that information to come out, but just because the video contains important information doesn't mean that Instagram is going to serve it to people. It doesn't mean that it's going to get sent. And
Yeah.
I see people make these really basic mistakes of like, oh, if you have a 4-minute video, it is only going to be shown to your followers who like already are really locked in and watch everything that you watch, which sometimes that's valuable. Sometimes you pin that video and say, this is an important one that I want everyone to see who I've already convinced to listen to me. But to get outreach, to get that information out to other people, we're all fighting against this very broken system of companies deciding what people watch instead of people going to the companies and demanding to watch the sort of thing that they want to watch. There's been that big shift in like people don't Google like what's happening in Minneapolis, or don't go to YouTube and type in what's going on in Minneapolis. They just, what we're trying to do is get some random person scrolling to get served a video of one of us talking about what's happening. So I mean, because it sounds like you're I mean, I'm very, very impressed by your approach to what information needs to go into those videos. I don't have any questions about what you said, but like, can you elaborate a little bit on how you kind of navigate that problem of like Instagram doesn't actually care if we succeed in getting the message out, like the incentive structure being so misaligned with activism, with journalism.
Yeah. And it's ironic because I was aware of a lot of those negatives with working online and like those areas that you kind of had to be able to work around in order to theoretically make a productive video that would also gain traction. But quite frankly, like my first month on the ground in Minnesota, I didn't put much thought into that whatsoever. I was like, how can I frame this so it looks good? And how can I communicate it in a way that makes as much sense as possible in a short amount of time? But beyond that, I wasn't really focused on quality. I wasn't really
Mm.
focused on having a hook. I wasn't really focused on all the things that would go into someone normally navigating the algorithm. I kind of learned that through connecting with other content creators as I was doing the reporting effort. Like at the very beginning, I hadn't even had any practice using like video or audio editing software either. Like I literally just plugged my lavaliers in, edit everything through Instagram itself, throw captions on it, date and timestamp, just copy the main points into the description, then upload it and do that 5 or 6 times a day, which I wasn't even thinking about the cap that's there for that as well. Because for those that know more about like how Meta works, like you kind of are stuck at like if you post more than like 5 videos to Instagram a day, then the algorithm also starts punishing you because you're putting out too much content too fast. Like it's a balance between all these different things. But I wasn't focused on any of that. I was just focused on what can I communicate and how can I get that out to people that I know need this information. And it just suddenly happened, I think, through a mix between the news cycle and then how I was reporting. It was able to take off and I started gaining like 1,000 followers a day. It wasn't until like later on within the crisis itself that I started trying to put more time and energy into like quality of content, like playing around. Every time I made a video, I kind of like had this mental focus of I am going to spend 10 more minutes and just try to experiment with different types of captions, where I'm putting them. Going to try to make a cover, going to try to make some kind of ending sequence. And I'm not going to do it on every video, but every single time I post something, I want to work on one additional thing. I'm going to try out the techniques that other content creators have told me for being able to break through the algorithm. I'm going to collab with more people that I haven't collabed with before, different ways of trying to like push the platform. But it was literally like because I was learning everything by trade and because I was doing so much all the time, hence why it ended up being like 17-hour days. I didn't put a lot of focus on trying to make the best content. Just how can I talk about what I see is going on and the patterns that are there from a strategy lens? And then how can I supplement that with a little bit of footage of what's going on, especially if I was doing like on the ground reporting at the time. Let me go and show federal agents like chasing down protesters, and then let me talk about what is happening leading up to that and how we respond to that going forward. Or if I'm making all these observations, because I did a lot over at the Whipple Federal Building for a few weeks there. Like I was making observations around where people were placed at the top of the building, like spying on those who were down below and picking people out of the crowd, or how they were changing up their tactics or disguises, or how they were going about like shifting the placement of their vehicles within the lot there. I would look for all that information, figure out how to summarize it in my mind, and then just communicate. And once it hit that 250 mark on my camera, I would be like, okay, I need to just stop here. I'm going to sum up the rest, and then anything that I missed, I'm going to include in a later video when I have enough information to go and put out again. But it really wasn't much about the quality at the time. It was more so about the quantity, and not even the quantity for building a platform, just the quantity for getting information out fast enough that people could use it. So I feel like I kind of ended up in a unique niche in that sense and kind of rode like the news cycle wave in order to gain the attention that I did at the time. And it wasn't necessarily like actually trying to be skilled at content creation in that sense.
Well, I mean, frankly, it sounds to me like you are skilled in content creation because you kind of know what's important. I figured out pretty early on with like getting my clips posted that it's like, especially early on, but especially before you do the work of like finding all those little individual things that you can work on, it is just quantity over quality. So you can post 20 trial reels and like not flood the feed too much, like you said, but also just like look at the performance of each of them and be like, what works, what doesn't work. And I did the same thing of like, all right, I'm in a good flow of doing this. It's working. The videos are performing better and better. Let's figure out doing like way better subtitles. Let's figure out like whatever other little things. And I kind of always have the same like thing of like a couple of things I'm working on where it's like we're trying to make this improvement right now, we'll do that improvement next week after we figure out this improvement and get it nicely nestled into the workflow so that it's not the elephant in the room in terms of the new thing we're trying anymore.
And it makes it easier like capacity wise because there's always so much that you're multitasking at the same time in order to be able to produce stuff. So
well, especially when I was doing it all myself. My viewers know I have help, and you met Jessie, the producer, who's on God Mic over there for those watching.
Yeah.
Hello, Jesse. But when I was doing it all by myself, it's like if I have this many hours in the day, maybe I don't have, maybe it's not that many hours because I was still working another job. It's like I can, if I can saturate that amount of time making content and then get better at that workflow so that I don't saturate the time anymore, that gives me another hour or two at the end. And then I can saturate it again by coming up with some more steps to do to make the content better. And it's been a rinse and repeat on that all the way through. Whether we get time back by me hiring somebody to do the work or just getting faster at it or like finding shortcuts or whatever it is, it's so many little individual steps to keep track of that it is just this beast of a thing to like keep compressing it down, make it more complicated, compress it down again.
Yeah.
But I've been, I mean, I was digging through your Instagram page today because I realized like I've been served some videos by you, but you have a well of content. There's a lot of information that you've pushed, and overall, I'm just like hugely impressed with you doing so much more work. It's the type of work I wanted to do, but I found myself better at the debate thing, and I was able to just follow people like you who are doing the work of being in all those signal chats and getting all that information and getting out there. And I think those signal chats kind of bring me to like the next thing I want to talk about, which I talk to my audience a lot about the way in which this administration has weaponized the Department of Justice against people who are doing organizing work. And I'm in this position where I was doing a lot more on the ground ICE observation and stuff like that in January, February, and March during Metro Surge. But that was during the time that I had this debate thing that started working out for me and found that that's maybe a better use of my time in terms of my skill set. So I backed away from it a little bit. And then I saw a bunch of people that I knew in that space get arrested. And so I just kind of want your general thoughts about like the state of affairs in terms of the Department of Justice's approach to organizers.
Yeah, I think that, I've said it in some of my previous videos over the last like month and a half. I've slowed down on making content as of late because I've been up in Alaska, but I've been trying to figure out how to come back and start my own team to be able to also have more capacity moving forward. But, you know, it was always my theory that the direction that we were moving in with Operation Metro Surge was one in which that it felt like the federal government was trying to basically build off the tension that existed post Floyd between the community and law enforcement and the community and politicians in order to hopefully be able to create an onset towards the Insurrection Act or something similar that would allow them to utilize federal resources or the military and other partnerships that they have as kind of like a form of suppression. And, that was a timeline that I didn't exactly know how to play out, but I thought it was going to be something that was going to be taking place over a much longer period. And the last few months, like going from Operation Metro Surge up until like a month ago with the 15 individuals who were arrested in Minnesota for being involved in rapid response at the beginning of this year, like, they basically have tried to establish it from the beginning with like, even the hours immediately following Renee Good's death of trying to label her as a domestic terrorist and then trying to label Julio Sosa Siles as a domestic terrorist, and then trying to label Alex Preddy after his death as a domestic terrorist, and then using that same language to try to go and build up a case against like the 39 individuals who were protesting in St. Paul at a church at the beginning of this year, and then the 15 individuals who were arrested like about a month and a half ago now for being involved in rapid response groups as also being domestic terrorists or being part of whether it's Antifa groups as they keep labeling it or rapid response networks as they've now labeled it within the indictment they put out against the Minnesota 15, trying to essentially make these connections that those who are involved within organizing efforts are involved in organizations or organized spaces that are quote unquote inherently violent and thus either part of Antifa or part of this whole narrative that's being pushed right now of left-wing like domestic terrorism that they're claiming exists both within the US and across the rest of the world. And so I think right now we're entering dangerous times where like, rapid response groups are inherently non-violent. Minnesota did a great job of setting a standard of like peaceful resistance despite the amount of emotions that obviously have existed throughout the last 7 months of this crisis and will continue to exist and in response to like all the various situations that did occur during that time. Like staying nonviolent is something that really comes down to you having to keep yourself in check and having to keep others around you in check because you're in this heightened moment of adrenaline, of fear, and everything else. But rapid response groups, like they're nonviolent responses. They're people recording what's happening. They're people that are trying to trace what's going on. They're people that are trying to warn their neighbors so that way they can find protection. People who are organizing mutual aid responses or rent assistance in order to help families that are being directly impacted by crisis. It's not something that is quote unquote inherently violent like what's being put out. But the danger now is of like if they can quickly label anyone that would be, a casualty within the community, like accidentally being in a space with ICE agents or proactively resisting ICE agents or being someone who is Black or brown that they can otherwise go and frame as someone that is a criminal and that they want to target out of like the racist narrative that is oftentimes put in place to justify ICE operations. It means that they're moving in a direction of potentially labeling anyone involved in the community who would resist the Trump administration as being essentially political opponents, and through that as being involved in quote unquote domestic terrorism, even though that's not the case. And so maybe that's a little bit confusing how I worded that, but
Well,
like I
yeah,
think
I mean, I engage a lot with like that system of labels where like I debate with people who say like these are terrorists, and I'm like, buddy, you're talking
yeah,
about me. I am one of the people who went and did this ICE observation. That's like I mentioned earlier. Like those are the first videos I made. It was just like me yelling at ICE agents, and they're like, yelling's not
yeah,
peaceful, and I'm like, I don't think you understand the First Amendment. like yeah, you said
yeah,
yourself, emotions are heightened and people are upset. But there was a really powerful air of accountability among ICE observers, because when people did step
yeah,
out of line, sometimes it's literally the line in the pavement on the floor that makes it like legal, whether or not you're standing there in the street or on the sidewalk, which is why I so often talk about civil rights abuses from ICE agents in terms of like violating people's First Amendment who are exercising it from the street corner, because I can't speak for everybody. People made mistakes. People,
yeah,
did good trouble type actions like blocking traffic and stuff like that. I'm not going to pretend that no laws were broken, but there was an air of responsibility of people saying like, hey, no, stand there. Like, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. That gives them the warrant they need to detain you or whatever thing.
yep,
And there's no attention on that. And it's easy to look at like a couple of people who misbehaved and say like, these are violent, dangerous, crazy terrorists, when the thing that's most like saddening to me about people who weren't tapped into the sort of algorithm on Instagram that served me your content, because obviously Instagram knows I want it. I live here. I'm dealing with it. I'm the algorithm has ways of knowing who you're friends with and like what you're involved
yeah,
in. So it serves it to me because I'm desperate for information about what's happening in my community. But to average Joe sitting somewhere on the couch, it's like there's this huge thing that's happening in Minneapolis that the mainstream media is doing, in my opinion, a horrendous job reporting on accurately.
oh,
Um,
100%.
and even on what's supposed to be like our side of the political spectrum, we just like don't see any accountability for claims from the federal government that anybody in these signal chats is a terrorist. And it's like, well, that's why we've started seeing protest signs here in Minneapolis that say 100,000 unindicted co-conspirators, because the number of people in these signal chats was enormous. It was the churchgoer, it was the soccer mom,
Yeah,
it was it was the local
everyday
community
people.
leaders, yeah, who just, as you referenced some of the mutual aid stuff, rent assistance, some of just like my immediate friends like happen to be really involved in doing grocery runs for families that were afraid to leave the homes. Like I'm just personally more educated about that stuff, because one person can make a mistake in terms of doing something that's technically illegal or offends the pearl clutching sensibilities of the people that I debate with on my show, and they don't pay attention to the fact that it was mostly 100,000 people looking out for their neighbors. It's mostly
Yeah,
100,000 people just trying to keep the community as safe as possible and make sure that people knew their rights and had good opportunity to exercise them. But we're now in this situation where organizers are scared to organize.
yeah,
I'm personally very disappointed with the actions of groups like 5051 and like the No Kings movement, because they really built a lot of momentum going into No Kings 3, which by the turnout was really incredible. But then in the time since No Kings 3, which was at the end of March if I'm not mistaken, we've seen a real
yeah.
pullback in this pressure to just get people out into the streets, because that's the thing that defeats the media's grip on people's attention to what's happening. If there's a
Oh,
1,000 people
100%. Yeah,
walking down the street, the big street near you live in your small town, near where you live in your city, you notice that. Oh, are you maybe late coming home from work because there was 10,000 people marching down Main Street? Like the media can't stop you from noticing that, which is why it's such a valuable tool, and why I was so very disappointed that No Kings 4 was like a throw your own watch party from home live stream type event. Like
yeah,
that to me didn't feel like protesting, and I really worry that we're in a situation where major organizing groups like that are potentially losing steam, and people hear so much more about the consequences for these few, as opposed to the fact that it's so many of us working for our community. Very, very, very rambly, open-ended question here, but like, given that
Yeah.
as the state of affairs, like, what do you think is the sensible path forward for people like you and me and anyone else who wants to keep fighting this thing by, with information and with media?
Yeah, I think, that's where the big macro question comes into play as to like, are we going to learn from everything we've experienced so far as we move forward? Because on one end, I think whether it's through burnout or the want to deny like the reality of the state that we're living in right now, or just, maybe ignorance and just being blindsided by what's happening. Like the federal government is very quickly moving in a direction of creating a narrative through disinformation and misinformation of establishing anyone who would be involved in organized efforts, again, as being like political opponents or domestic terrorists. That way, most likely they can utilize federal resources and agents to start targeting aspects of community resistance in order to scare people out of getting involved. And on one end, we have that going on. And on the other end, we've been consistently playing defense, whether we're working in legal teams or working in rapid response groups or working in organized efforts or working in media, whether it's more on like the content creation influencer side or more on the journalism side. Like we're constantly responding to what's happening. We're not really being predictive or proactive and like determining what we think is going to happen and using the data that we have so far to be able to plan out our responses for the future. And I think that that's where the big shift needs to come into play, is like, one, to recognize the fact that like the Trump administration and any kind of authoritarian power that exists within the world gains its power through a mix between propaganda on one end of building up their own following that thus gives them kind of like a cult of personality that they'll end up following. Like they follow Trump, they follow MAGA because Trump targeted disenfranchised, a population that feels disenfranchised by the government right now, and appeal to them, appeal to the poor and rural areas, appeal to people who are frustrated by how America is going, and promising to basically break from the establishment in the same way that we see like Mamdani do it on the left, but with more moral and ethics that we actually, value and align with. But it's still that sense of appealing to the disenfranchised. And on the other end of that is like being able to create a sense of fear, using propaganda to create an enemy so big that you are scared, and thus you can justify volatile response to it out of trying to address like a crisis of its own. And so what I think we need to do at this point is like, A, recognize the fact that they want us to be afraid, and know that getting involved in the community doesn't mean that we have to be afraid. Like we might have to shift the way in which we're doing things, such as like, I think we're entering a time where labeling response efforts as being rapid response networks or rapid response groups might not be the best move anymore, because now they're putting it in an indictment that rapid response networks are quote unquote inherently violent. And so they're probably going to move that rhetoric into labeling those as domestic terrorism organizations in official like executive order policy moving forward. I see
Well,
that
and
as a
that's
likely.
the sort of like precedent setting that the administration does, because it was a year
Yeah,
ago that Trump used an executive order to create this label of terrorism for Antifa, which was like a joke to
exactly.
everybody. And I'm looking at it like, that's not a joke. Like, we're all fucking terrorists now. Like,
A joke
that's
until the Minnesota 15 get arrested and suddenly they're linking Antifa back to rapid response
right,
groups.
right, exactly. So it's like, each thing is this little like tiny little thing, this little bit of erosion of rights through precedent, where it's like, all right, nobody really complained about that executive orders, nobody, and the
Yeah,
question right now is like, are these charges going to stick in any kind of way? Because if they do, they create this incredible precedent to go after anybody for just about anything,
yeah,
in the way that you just said. So like that's going to have us having to burn a label like rapid response, which obviously, I mean, I have in this episode talked about the fact that I participated in rapid response. It's public
yeah,
knowledge. I get
same.
teased in TikTok chats where people are like, this guy's trying to get himself arrested, and I'm like, I'm trying to show that there's too many of us for us all to be arrested. Like,
Yeah,
they wouldn't arrest 1,000 Minnesotans that today. Would they in 5 months? Would they after the midterms? Like, what, like, that's the thing that I worry about in terms of like the escalation of this. It's like, it's the 15 people that they had the most dirt on.
yeah,
If that's the start, if that gets their foot in the door for charging people for these sorts of things, then that maybe creates enough precedent to go and find people who've said online that they did similar things, and use that as evidence. And in a justice system where that sort of precedent sticks, like, that to me is really, really, really concerning. And the
yeah,
hard thing for me to navigate is like, how do we get how do we bridge this gap between the Minnesota 15 and people like them, which is like a really small number of organizers, to like the millions of people who participated in No Kings 3, because there's such a wide gap between them in terms of that, massive group of people who are aware that something bad is happening, and then the people who are close to the ground. Whereas like the more each of us can say that we're a part of it, the more I say publicly that I was in the Signal chats. I say publicly that my neighborhood block is Alex Preddy's Signal chat, because I found out that he was dead from the Signal chat instead of from the news. I had this, I'm sure you read the same message about how CPR was being performed on an observer who's been shot, and more observers were requested at Glam Doll Donuts. And for me, I don't know what we can do to get people to stay out in the public and say, no, this is everybody who cares about democracy. This is not just this is not a small organized group of like terrorists or anything. Like, I want the branding around us to be the soccer mom, and I'm just terrified that like they can kill a soccer mom on Portland Avenue, but the message, to national media on the 6 o'clock news doesn't convey at all what happened here.
Well, and that's where I think it's so hard, because it's like, in order to move forward, like first we have to like diagnose our own movement efforts, and movement efforts being any kind of like response to crisis, or like, organized groups that specifically focus on certain issues of advocating for something or trying to stop something from happening, but like movement spaces. Like we need to diagnose what hasn't been working in order to start finding solutions and what could potentially work. Because obviously, like right now, we're at a phase where they might label a lot of people within the community. And this goes back to like, again, it could be journalists, it could be content creators, it could be, or anyone involved in rapid response, whether it's a librarian or a student or someone that works at a restaurant, like within your neighborhood, like they could end up being a part of that determined label that they want to go and put out there, and the narrative that they're trying to push, whether it's legal or not. But they can't arrest 5,000 people. They don't have the capacity, they don't have the resources to be able to do that yet. They might potentially be building up to that, but they're not there, which means that we're in a time right now where if we stick together, if we're more focused on how we can create those kind of bonds within the community that can persevere through that fear, we have the ability to protect each other. And I think that's where a huge part of like media comes into play, is like the bigger a platform becomes and the more people involved in that platform, the platform almost acts as a shield and a sword at the same time. Like they can't go after organizations that have too much backing, too much public attention. They can't go after journalists or content creators that have too much support and too much backing. They would become too much of a public issue.
Mm-hmm.
The bad publicity will end up ricocheting back to the Trump administration and their partners if they try to do that, such as like what happened with Alex Preddy. They tried to label him as a domestic terrorist, trying to make this claim that he's trying to harm federal agents immediately after.
Trained assassin, right?
Trained assassin, which is
nonsense.
We could go into that.
Yeah.
But like the amount of camera angles that we ended up having basically disproved that, which then results in bad publicity, which then results in them having to go and retract agents because they can no longer continue the narrative that they're trying to put out, spreading like half truths or full lies to the public in hopes of being able to justify what they're doing. Like it doesn't work if you have evidence to prove it. So if we're all able to continue to respond like we were at the beginning of this year, but find ways to do it more sustainably, our best bet of being able to combat what they're doing right now is to both outpace them and outnumber them, and how fast the federal government is organizing itself right now and sending ICE agents or all the different agencies that exist under the ICE umbrella out to communities across the US. Like if we can be out in the streets en masse like we were at the beginning of this year with cameras, being able to quickly respond when something happens, like they can't get away with those things. We have too much evidence as to what's happening. The problem we all often face, though, that ends up destroying that sustainability, and this comes from like, at least from my perspective, from my own organizing experience, is that so often we get stuck in security culture and basically gatekeeping spaces, preventing accessibility. So often we get stuck in these mindsets as organized communities, whether it's an organization such as like 5051 or Sierra Club or Indivisible, or anything that has more of a structure to it, or more decentralized movements like what rapid response groups end up making up. Like we get so focused on planning behind the scenes that we don't tell the public people who are generally not involved in these spaces how to respond in their own right, how to have the tools and resources that they need, the whys behind what we're doing, so they not only understand what is happening, but why it is happening, both on our side and what's happening from the opponents or the Trump administration in this case. And I think that's one of the areas that we really need to target is we need to stop keeping everything behind the scenes and we need to start bringing that to the public. We need to start giving the general public the full map of what's going on so anyone can be able to respond because that's what we saw at the beginning of this year. It was a combination between a lot of coalition building and organizations coming together and figuring out ways in which they could help support one another in their various efforts while still delegating like specific focuses that they would each have. And the community, many people joining in these efforts not necessarily having organization or not necessarily coming from organizing backgrounds, but just coming in with their own passions and their own skill sets and finding ways to adapt that to what was happening to be able to support their communities that allowed us to act so quickly. So I think moving forward, it comes down to a lot of like, how do we supplement the disservice that national media and legacy outlets are currently creating, where they're just perpetuating the same misinformation that's already existing from the Trump administration, only covering volatile situations by creating more citizen journalists? How do we start building coordination and collaboration between the different organized efforts that exist within our community? How do we start creating pipelines of more accessibility for more people to get involved? And then, the greatest question that I don't personally have an answer to yet, that I don't know anyone has an answer to yet, is like, not necessarily thinking about how to pull people in from the MAGA side, but the massive population that sits in between those who are engaged and those who are against anyone that would resist what the Trump administration is doing, that sits in the middle of people who are apathetic or sympathetic or empathetic but aren't actively involved. How do we start reaching those people? And I think that largely comes from us building hyper-local neighborhood efforts and connecting with people in our own communities, physically going door to door and talking to people in the same way that like electoral organizations will do that for trying to push people out to the elections, as well as using that citizen journalism and creating more citizen journalists in our own communities, talking about what's happening and giving them the skills to act as journalists and not just showing what's happening, but being able to provide context so that way the people within your immediate network start feeling connected to what's happening, can see it, and thus be able to respond. And maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong, but I think that's the direction we probably should start heading in, at least from my perspective.
Well, yeah, and that gets to like this question of like, what do we do about what is happening right now? What do we, the people, do about what our government is getting up to right now? Because when I see attacks on organization through indictments like the ones we saw with the Minnesota 15, as well as some other ones, I like the thing that I see is like we need some kind of diffuse response. Like we need some kind of like to build resistance to this, to build to make our communities impervious to this sort of action by the government. It's like there's no amount of tracking signal chats that will stop a building, like an apartment building full of people, becoming better neighbors and making sure that there's someone to guard the door if ICE is afoot, or whatever thing it might be. But that's also just really hard to do in a society where people's attention more and more and more and more is on whatever the phone is telling them to look at or whatever the TV is telling them to look at. I mean, I've had awareness campaigns throughout the protest scene here in Minneapolis where I've been like, at what point do we start papering? Like, at what point do we start printing 10,000 flyers and just putting them everywhere we can find them? Because that just skips past the algorithm. At what point does that become dangerous work, right? I mean, if you were to do community outreach in that sort of way, like that's the sort of thing where like the wording of that flyer is going to be scrutinized for maybe some of those buzz terms like rapid response or something like that can call, give the administration some excuse to call this, terrorist organizing or whatever they want to call people, essentially just preaching a message of being more connected with their neighbors, which is the thing that as a local Minnesotan, like I've lived here for 10 years. I moved here from New York. So when you mentioned I'm down in New York, I've got my own personal opinions about that because I think he's doing some really impressive stuff for the cities, for the city.
I talk endlessly about him.
Yeah. No. I think he has more power as mayor of New York than most governors have over a state because he's a mayor of 10 million people is nothing to sneeze at. But here, as a Minneapolite, I lived here through COVID. I was here for the Floyd riots. I was like on the street observing what was going on when that happened, and I've seen the way the community reacts. So when I saw that Trump was elected, and I figured that it's some sort of weaponization of these federal agents, whether it's National Guard being sent into a city or like an ICE action like Metro Surge that we saw, like I knew something was coming, and I kind of had this thought of like, I don't know if they know who they're messing with. We're pretty organized over here in Minneapolis. Like, it's my experience that when shit hits the fan here, like there's this ethos of just show up, like whatever happened, just go there. Like, no organization needed if everybody knows that's kind of the rule, which is why we saw like a mob form when Renee Good was murdered. We saw an even bigger crowd form when Alex Preddy was killed. And I can look at how Metro Surge went from the perspective of the federal government, because it comes down to this PR thing, right? They want us to look bad. But, there are particular incompetencies of the federal government that they're actually really not going to be able to defeat communities that connect with. You mentioned that arresting 5,000 people instead of 15 would be really, really hard. And it's very much the same thing, where if enough people are organized, if there's enough diffuse response to this sort of thing, then the federal government really can't deal with that. You can't stop 100,000 people from buying groceries for their neighbors. Where do you even begin on that? And I think that's the thing that gives me hope. It's just we have this problem of reaching enough people, like you said. And I think that the organization needs to go back to the grassroots. You're right. I think we need to knock on doors. We need to skip the physical media to the degree that we're able. But it falls back on the organizers to do that, which has me concerned about what it's going to look like going into November. I mean, how are you feeling about November? I think that's my question there.
Yeah, I think that the direction we're heading in, I don't think that the elections are necessarily the ultimate goal of the federal government. I feel like they're an objective within it, but I feel like there's definitely going to be election interference of some kind. Now,
are you planning any coverage? Do you have your own plan for how you want to handle it as the date gets nearer and nearer?
Yeah, right now I'm in the process of trying to figure out how to form my own investigative journalism team. I'm specifically focused on the intersection between what is happening with ICE and the elections this fall, and currently working with a few others from across the country in order to try to plan this out and work on figuring out how to acquire funding and everything for it. But our specific theory is there is going to be something that happens, and it's related between these two existing components of what's going on this year. I think my greatest concern right now is, how are they going to go about doing it? I think so oftentimes in the community, we have the tendency to view our opponents as being people who oftentimes make mistakes, as though they don't actually know what they're doing. They're just working off a racist agenda. They just want control. And while those might be motivating aspects, I don't think we're up against people that are not also highly intelligent with morals and ethics that are horribly skewed. And so they have whole think tanks working behind the scenes. I think they can recognize the fact that they don't have the infrastructure in place right now to be able to respond to the number of people who are against the Trump administration, what's happening. And so both with the elections and what they're doing in preparation with the ICE umbrella and the Homeland Security Task Force and the massive amounts of money that are being flooded over into surveillance partnerships and tech partnerships, especially, I think they recognizing the fact that they don't have the capacity right now, they're working on building the infrastructure so they have more tools, they have more resources, they have more personnel in place that as we get to the elections, they actually can go about, whether it's election interference or starting to target political opponents or doing both, be able to move into that phase of things. And the question at that point for me is what is that going to look like? Is that going to look like psychological warfare of them using the trauma associated with ICE operations to just have ICE agents within a state that they want to make sure that the elections are not in favor of us for, and thus prevent people from going to the polls because they're scared to leave their houses or they're too involved in rapid response to actually be able to go and vote? Or is it going to look like actual ICE agents or some agency within that umbrella actually existing at the polls in order to try to drive people away? They're already making claims about both simultaneously in press conferences from the last 2 weeks with the re-announcement of the NSPM 7, which is labeling left-wing groups as being terrorist organizations, and the need to go and start putting personnel specifically towards trying to uncover those networks and their funding sources and everything else, while simultaneously also starting narrative lines now months ahead of time that the elections are most likely going to be fraudulent and attacked by these far left-wing groups. And so I think that they're trying to drive two narratives at once to combine both of these in an effort to then do something with the elections. Because if they win the elections, they have the power to move forward in whatever agenda they want. But how they're going to go about doing it, I'm honestly not sure yet. I think what we need, though, is to create a coordinated effort between media that currently exists, between content creators, between journalists, between independent media, to be able to come together and work as investigative teams to try to understand the full three-dimensional playing field of all these partnerships and investments and initiatives that are going on and how they relate to one another, so the public knows what's happening. And at the very least, like if we end up somehow losing the elections, organized efforts can thus still be able to respond to it. We can still give the information to legal teams who can use it. We can still give that information to politicians who can use it. We can still give that information to community organizations who can use it to be able to respond to whatever comes next. Personally, that's kind of my approach, but I also have been out of Minnesota for a while too, so I'm not sure if you've heard other ideas as to what people are expecting like back home right now.
Well, it's the midterms are of course bigger than Minnesota, and the concern that I have as someone who lives in a city that, like, I'm very proud of my city's response to Metro Surge. Like, it's so incredible that so many people turned out. But one of the things that gave us, like, the ability to do that is that there was so much community engagement, there was so much organization, there was so much heard through the grapevine, there was so much that I might learn from a quick Lee Stedman video or something like that, that we were able to adapt and change as they went. Because, like, there were a bunch of those incompetent foibles that I talked about. Like, it was very silly of the federal government to come here when it was -10 degrees. That gave us the home field advantage. That we
It
made
also
them.
gave us a lot of really great memes of ice agents slipping and falling on ice.
Yeah. I mean, that's that photograph of the where the reporter's standing right over them, right as his chest plopped on the ice. Like, that's like that. That helps us win the PR battle. And then the fact that they went into all these communities shock and awe with, like, tear gas and pepper balls and, like, all this craziness, like the Miller Park incident, which I was present for, like all this craziness, where, like, they, by the time Alex Preddy's murdered, they're thinking, like, okay, hold on, we're losing the 2A guys because of Alex Preddy, we're losing the soccer moms because of Renee Good, we're losing everybody who doesn't want tear gas in their neighborhood. So they really had to change tactics. But when I look forward at something like the midterms, where there is going to be an effort for intimidation, there is going to be an effort to be disruptive of people's safety and comfort when they're walking into the polling place, my biggest concern is that for most people, the election happens on one day. And because of that, there is going to be no feedback of, like, all right, they're trying this, let's try this in response, and then, like, do this arms race of, like, how effectively can we, without breaking the law, make it so that we can protect our communities from ICE agents. Like, there is no back and forth. We just have to have an approach going into the midterms that is hardy to whatever the federal government might try in order to intimidate people. But then, like, I know from talking to the opposition that I spend all this time talking to, that when I say, like, they're like, well, why would there be a problem for there would be ICE agents standing by the polling station if you're not doing anything wrong? And I'm like, for the same reason that it would hurt the black vote if there were two police officers standing either side of the door at the polling station. And if you don't recognize that, like, okay, now we need to argue about whether white privilege exists. Now we need to argue about whether it's reasonable for a person who is, if we're talking about polling places, I have to say this to like the opposition that I talk to all the time. It's like, we are just talking about people who have voting rights. So we're talking about citizens here. It's just that they, like, a lot of people can't even understand that a person who's not white has fear around this whole thing that's, like, very real. They don't even seem to care that the Supreme Court has ruled that your skin color and the accent with which you speak English is enough for an ICE agent to go by in terms of detaining you, which means that if you have either of those characteristics, a non-American accent or a non-white skin color, now you risk being detained walking past the ICE agents into the polling place. Maybe you have to bring your kids with you because you don't have childcare, or, like, whatever the thing might be that makes it scary and intimidating. And I know that the solution to the fact that all happens on one day is that we need to be organized leading up to it, and that we need to keep the outreach. And that's why I'm very excited seeing growth in different spheres. There's creators like you that I've seen grow, and, like, in my space where I debate on TikTok Live, like, there's big names like Dean Withers, where, like, you know,
Yeah.
he's been huge and successful for a while now, but to see how fast he's still growing is encouraging to me. Because you know that sort of debate content isn't going to, you know, get people mobilized to protect their neighbors at the polling place, but it gets people paying attention to the type of problems that we're facing in the country, and maybe gets them listening to a conversation like the one that we're having right now. If maybe they found me through that space or something like that. So, like, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to connect this rapidly growing, conflict-driven, admittedly grifty content format where I'm like, I spend like 65% of my time like clowning on chuds. I'm basically a stand-up comedian. Like, I'm just like doing this like entertaining chess game of like winning the debate, and then like 35% of the time I have a really serious conversation where I actually either reach the caller, or the way in which I defeat the opponent in the argument, if it is that sort of just completely oppositional, like we're in the octagon together type of call. Like, I'm creating content that will be shown to people because it's conflict driven, but I'm saying stuff that matters. And when I have a moment that like has this hook of like, ooh, this video might grab people, I look down at the little live streaming timer and I think to myself, I have 3 minutes to land the plane. I have 3 minutes, because they're going to get hooked by that very, very dumb thing he just said. And that means that I have 3 minutes from now to plead my case to the people who will, having seen that as the front of the video, make it all the way to the back of the video. And that's me just leveraging the skill set that I have in this. But I mean, the thing I want to scream from the rooftops is that, like, you have your skill set, I have my skill set, and we're both trying to do that effort of getting more awareness around this thing so that people can use the things that they're good at to serve their community, whether it's door knocking on the block you live on, setting up the signal chat for your building or for your neighborhood block, or whatever it is. We need more people taking actionable steps to make communities impervious to whatever gets tried during the midterms, because we don't know, and they're going to spring it on us, right? Like, if I'm to make any predictions about what I think the federal government will do, they don't want you and me sitting around with our, you know, wealth of experience dealing with federal agents during Metro Surge to come up with what they're going to do and find a sensible way for the community to resist that intimidation. So they're probably going to procrastinate any announcements about anything until the very end, or not announce what they're doing. And we just need to keep leveraging the growth that some people have been able to find on social media. I think, which is why I think it's so crucial that there's so many people like you taking your own approach to it, because your videos are effective. They worked on me. You found your way into my feed because if I saw your head talking, if Instagram, it's one of those things where maybe it's because I wasn't following you, that if Instagram showed me a video of yours, I was like, oh, this has got to be an important one. Maybe if the algorithm is good for anything, it's knowing that this Lee Stedman video is one that Oskar Quentin wants to see, because I did see a lot of content that like got my attention on what I needed it on in terms of my local community. But I don't know how we amplify that effort beyond what each of us are capable of with our own accounts. Because it is such a diffuse grassroots thing, all these different creators with these different approaches to the question of like, how do we just make people aware of the ways in which the government is misbehaving in some pretty obviously un-American type of ways. But yeah, I guess I want your thoughts on like what do you think the role of social media can be as this thing keeps growing? Because the number of people paying attention to this online is rapidly growing by the numbers. The people who make content about this are rapidly expanding, and I'm sitting here, one of those people, thinking like, guys, what do we do about this? We actually kind of we're like the dog that caught the mail truck often, where it's like we have like hold on. I have a bunch of followers. What do I tell them? What do I tell them to do?
Yeah. No, there's so many points in what you just said that I would love to go and touch on, because I feel like there's so many parts
Sorry for
of
being
it
long-winded.
No, I've been doing the exact same thing, so I feel like I'm getting a taste of that as well. So I think that, first off, I think it's important to pick out the fact that like our different approaches to how we go about communicating information, whether it is in more of a strategy of debate, or it's in more of a strategy of communicating like things that we normally go about analyzing from an organizer lens, or we're communicating things in more entertaining ways, or like touching into like almost more comedy, or doing more of like the live streams like Andrew Mercado does. Like, the fact of the matter is, I think that those are indicative of what people want right now. Like, there's the failure of legacy media in the sense that legacy media is now largely being bought out by the Trump administration and their partners, and are being completely gutted. Like, actual trained journalists who have been in the field for decades are getting thrown out now because they don't want to go by the established rules that are now in place after their agencies are bought out. And those legacy outlets, like, oftentimes only report on the most volatile things, and they only report in the very robotic way that they want to try to show unbiased objectivity, but that doesn't exist within journalism. Like, journalists side themselves with whatever moral and ethics that they believe in. And so it's important to understand, like, the discernment of information and objectivity is separate from not necessarily having an opinion, you know? And with that, it's like, because of the way in which legacy outlets have otherwise been organized, because it sounds so robotic, because they only report on the volatile situations, because when you turn on the TV, all you're hearing about is this shooting occurred or that shooting occurred, or there's a robbery here or whatever else, like, people don't want to watch it. It's just constant negative stream of information. People are seeking out authenticity. They're seeking out emotions that they align with. They're seeking out information that makes them feel like they know how to respond in the midst of what feels like a growing collective existential crisis. Like, they want something that feels real, real attachment, real connection, real authenticity, real information that they can trust. And so I think it's really important that we do have different styles for how we communicate, because different people have different ways of receiving information that they respond the best to. And I think what it ultimately comes down to is, like, for those of us that are not just making content for the sake of making content and growing our own platforms, but are making content because we want to get important information to the public and try to help in times of crisis like this, we need to figure out how to start working together amongst ourselves, how to coordinate. We don't have the size or the capacity or the resources or the funding of mainstream media or legacy outlets. We are collectively all trying to figure out our own niches and figure out how to get paid to be able to do it full time, and also trying to, like, figure out how to be able to continue to disperse ourselves amongst many different areas so we can cover as much as we can, and trying to, like, lend a helping aid here while also reporting. Like, it's a lot. It's too much for any one person to do or any small team to do. And if we found a way for us to be able to start working together, to be able to have a shared platform where we're able to do our own thing, but we can be collaborating and cross promoting and cross posting one another in order to help build that up, and be strategizing on, like, when we release information, how we go about collecting information, sharing stories from across the country, being able to compile that all into a database that allows us to be able to have a conceptual, like, timeline as to what is actually going on, and be able to give those resources to the public. Like, those things allow us as independent media to not only be more organized and more effective in what we're doing, because we can amplify both the reach of our platforms collectively by coordinating, but it also gives more of the public the opportunity to see what's happening on the macro scale of what's going on. So I know for me, like, the idea that I've been floating personally, like, in a direction that I want to take, is, like, reviving the concept that I had for Impulse back in, like, 2019, 2020, of, like, wanting to create, like, an umbrella media organization that just allows us to have a centralized place that we can be promoting and cross promoting, like, progressive media projects, but base it in journalism, base it in organizing practices to make sure that we are communicating information that is based in truth. So that way the public has both a place where they can
I'm so
find
excited to
people.
hear you say
Sorry.
that. No,
So,
I
yeah.
just have to jump in there because I'm so excited to hear you say that, because it's like, it's the sort of thing that I think about, where I often have to keep my own side in check on the debate space, because, like I said, it's very grifty, it's very conflict driven, it's very like,
Yeah.
what drives engagement on a TikTok live stream. And I promise the easy answer is not the truth, is not the most academically, journalistically, intellectually honest way to behave. So I have my own practices for that I talk about with my audience. But I have a very similar idea that's been kicking around my head, that, like, if what I'm trying to build is trust, that if I co-sign something, it's probably reasonable. Or that if I co-sign something that isn't reasonable, my audience will be very upset with me, and I'll issue a correction.
Right.
And that's the sort of thing that sometimes I have to do. It happens live on the air all the time, because I think that's the thing that most worries me about this growing content space, is that there is a lot of media from people in my neck of the woods in terms of the political spectrum, where I watch it and I'm like, you didn't say that very carefully. That's not technically true, or that's not actually how the laws work, or that's inadvisable. Do not go do that with ICE agents. For whatever reason, I think something is completely unreasonable. So I almost like the idea of there being some sort of coalition of people who have more serious standards, like more of a
Yeah.
like I've been even just like on my own offline been kind of like writing with the intent of eventually coming up with some sort of straightforward mission statement that says what it is I'm trying to satisfy by co-signing
Yeah.
something
And
or
that's
by
everything that I've been working on over the last 2 months is doing exactly that too. So, like, I think a lot of us are having that similar idea of like, how do we go about creating something that is based on those practices and does have a driving mission that can bring us together, but how do we bring it into practice is
yeah.
like the big question because
Well, the
we're
media
trying
the
to
media
balance all our
organizations
different
don't support
styles.
it. Like Instagram
Right.
doesn't want to help us with that. Instagram doesn't want to give us the infrastructure to do that. But I think that like people who watch your videos trust you. People who watch my videos trust me. If you and I trust each other, there's
There's the
maybe some
platform. Yeah.
yeah. So when we talk about umbrella media organizations, I like that in terms of doing more than I can just by arguing with assholes on TikTok, which is what I spend most of my time doing. Like maybe under such an umbrella, I'm one of the guys who argues with assholes on TikTok because I'm really good at that. But then when I look at content that I don't have the time, space, attention, or skills to make, like maybe that's why I reference somebody a Lee Stedman video or whatever other person. I mean, like there's
Yeah.
so many names that I'll tell people to follow. Where it's like, you want to know what's going on in New Jersey? Like go follow Ian Austin. Like go follow all of these people. Actually, Ian Austin, you should follow, but he's not in New Jersey anymore because the federal government banished him to
Yeah.
Pennsylvania because he's one of the righteous 39, and they leveraged that as a mechanism to increase his conditions of release so that he has to stay confined to a state, which neuters
I
his ability to exercise his amendment rights.
I could go on about that for a while. Ian's a close friend of mine. We were actually roommates during Operation Metro Surge. So it's
I
being up
didn't
in
know
Alaska
that.
when that went through. Yeah,
Yeah, he's done an episode of this show, so people have heard from him pretty recently on
that's
here as
awesome.
well.
He is
Um,
great.
yeah, I love Ian. And that's something I talked to him about is like the idea of like there exists economy of scale under in that sort of umbrella, and Ian talked on the show about like not knowing what his approach to like doing it online, because he's out there as a frontliner, he's out there protesting,
Yeah.
he's out there doing the call to action that all the media that we want to create is supposed to encourage people to do. But he admits himself that he's not a social media expert, he's not a videographer, he's just
Yeah.
doing what he can. So I mean the big idea that's been kicking around my head is that like such an umbrella not only benefits from the mutual trust that exists by me being like, hey, you guys can trust somebody like Lee Stedman or Ian Austin when they tell you what's going on, and that brings our audiences together. But there's also benefit in pooling the resources of like maybe I know how to get a really aggressive production schedule going, because some of my background before all this is in production, so it wasn't totally alien for me to start taking some of these steps to like solidify these procedures and do that process I was talking about earlier of like compressing the production schedule by getting better at it so that you have room to make it more steps, and then compressing that, and like all these iterative
Yeah.
processes that are like reasonably second nature if you have production experience. It's how you go about any kind of workflow. But we are just this diffuse army of people who are like doing our best to make people like our videos. Like, how do we leverage that into something bigger? Which is maybe why I should talk to you offline about some of that.
I would absolutely love to, because like that's exactly the thing that I've been trying to spend this entire summer while I've been up in Alaska to figure out. Like, one end working to try to build an investigative team, on the other end working on building up the foundation for Impulse, or Impulse News Network is technically the full name. It's already LLC status and everything. It's just in the works of like trying to figure out what that structure looks like. Like, how can we create a platform that is multifaceted? Like, the opportunity to still retain our different styles and to be able to report in that way, but be able to promote each other in the process. That way people can find the information that they're looking for, but it's all still connected to the name. Like, this person is with Impulse. They know that that name resonates with a source of information that they can trust, with people that they can go to that they can trust. And thus, if that collaboration is there, like what you were talking about, like if you have followers that trust you and I have followers that trust me and we trust each other and we show that, like it builds the platform that we don't have individually, that oftentimes like the big national media outlets do have, because they've spent so many decades building up massive following, establishing themselves as the primary outlets. We don't have that. So we counter it by coming together with the followings that we do have and the people that do trust us, and giving them a landing place to be able to go to. And that could be a landing place that is based in partially in journalism, partially in like creative studio projects where we can experiment with different styles, that just like looking at the intersection between organizing and media and even art in it, like the ways in which allow us to drive our own creativity and passion to be sustained, but is still based in truth and is still based in reporting and is still based in call to actions and giving people the ability to go somewhere that they can find what they need to be able to respond or to be able to know what's happening right now. And I think the greatest crux is something that you've been mentioning that I've also been thinking heavily about, is like, even if so if that does get created, like it's not everyone. There's so many content creators that are popping off every single day now. And the problem there is another diagnosis that I feel like it is important to discuss. And that's the sense that there's so many people who are trying to replicate what has been done already throughout this year. And it's not necessarily a bad thing until you get into the fact that there's a lot of people that don't have those principles in journalism or in organizing or being able to discern information, that are just, kind of regurgitating whatever information they're immediately told or what they see at face value versus looking at the context versus like trying to like dig deeper into what is actually happening to provide that kind of information for the public to be able to also discern that information. So we just end up with people reporting stuff out that almost serves as a form of misinformation or half truths that then get spread out across the media ecosystem, and then people don't know what's happening anymore. And that almost serves the propaganda that we're trying to fight against, when those of us that are out there trying to like make sure that we're reporting information that people need to know gets lost in the massive ecosystem of new content creators that are emerging that aren't based in those same practices of being able to make sure that they are sticking to objectivity, even if they are still aligning themselves with resistance efforts. And that's a whole nother debate, and like something that we've never actually approached before, that I think we have to navigate as we move forward, whether it means coming together as a collective in the media community and like trying to navigate that in the broader media ecosystem, or just in general, like as we go forward as humans and how we go about receiving and looking for information, how we can find information that we can trust and discern that from information that ultimately is going to continue to like misdirect us.
Well,
And
because
I don't know
it's
if
a
I have the
huge
best
it's a
answer to
huge
that.
pool of videos that people are. Whoa, you dropped me.
We're good.
We're good. I survived. I'm okay. I'm okay. Yeah, when you talk about like that big media pool that exists, like that's one of the issues that I see with the challenge in front of us to get this organized, because sometimes people, stick their head in the room, whether it's on my stream or they just find a video on Instagram and they get locked into this and they go, oh my God, what's going on? What's going on at Delaney Hall? What's all this stuff that happened? But I don't know what to tell a person who wants to figure out what's happened over the course of the last 6 months, because it's like, where do you find the timeline on it? It all just gets lost in the feed. Like even my own journalistic content, there's stuff that I've covered in person because I live here in Minneapolis, and I hardly know what to tell people to do other than to spend like 5 minutes scrolling while each page refreshes on my Instagram to dig all the way back, because it only gives me 3 to pin. So I think
need some kind of searchable database.
I was about to say, we need a website. Like if I were in charge of that, if it was like my name on it, if I was like pushing this sort of idea of like a media umbrella, what I would want is like, all right, like here's 26 videos about Alex Preddy that have the cosign of the organization, which is to say that we believe the information in these videos to be true. Say what you want about the person making the video. Like everybody has the different sounding voice. Everybody makes different types of content. Like they have their creative freedom that appeals to their audience. So like maybe like this is the feed you scroll through, but that itself becomes like, that sounds nice. That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. But like, how do you get, like, I know just from trying to grow my own platform that getting a follower from somewhere to follow somewhere else is hard, let alone go to a whole other fucking website if we're going to like, fucking put it on oskarquentin.com or something. Like I want to create those resources. I want to have a timeline. I want to be able to say like, let's look at the federal actions of the government against, Antifa, people labeling them terrorists or whatever. And I want to have like the top down RSS feed type look of like, all right, it started with this executive order that happened right after he became president. And then there was this case and that case. by the way, a judge that he appointed. Like, there's all this, all the red strings that connect all of these individual actions together. One thing that the federal government has done is made it such a fucking rat's nest to keep track of, that there just isn't a database, like you said. And if there was, what would motivate people to go and learn from it?
Well, and that's actually the one fallacy that I think exists from the last 7 months, is that it appears like there's no database, but there's a number of organizations that I know of, even just in Minnesota, that have built databases. It's just, once again, that information is kind of gatekept from the public because people are so concerned about security culture right now, they're scared to share it. But if we don't have a public database that people can access, if we don't have a timeline that people can go back through to find information, and not to make it complicated, like you were saying, like have 5 different websites for reporting and for database and everything else, but a place people can go to for what they need, then the public doesn't have access to the information that they need ultimately. Like we need all that to be in one place.
Well,
so we need it to be.
Yeah, something that, like, for me is the poster child of this frustration is that people will tell me, like, ICE agents don't do that. An ICE officer wouldn't mace somebody who wasn't breaking a law. And I'm like,
and then here's X, Y, and Z documentation of it happening.
Well, right. So for me, it's like, I need to get in touch with people who've done some of the organizing work on some of the footage that's out there. Cause, like, oh God, I know somebody has a spreadsheet with hyperlinks where it's like, here's 1,000 examples of that. Here's 1,000 individual examples of that. Cause there's no way there's not 1,000 if I filmed half a dozen of them myself. Which I did. So it's like,
and that's the hard part, is that there's like 36 different databases that probably exist, but they exist in separate places. Like they need to exist in one place. That way we can have that.
Right. Or like how to, like, similarly, one thing I tell to the people I talk to on the call is like, tell me whatever you think about the Iran war, and I will provide for you a video of Donald Trump saying the opposite, which is a little bit of an empty threat. Because I'm not that organized, because I don't have it. Like I couldn't do it quickly, but I've never had anybody call me on it, because it's like, I could, like but because I can't, maybe that's not the strongest tool in my toolbox, as like a debate host, but like that's what I want to create. Like one of the jokes I tell about my frustration with media in 2026 is like, when I was a little kid, I'm just old enough to remember that there used to be this thing where if you found a video on the internet that was really cool, the next day maybe you'd want to show it to somebody, so you could just go right back to the same place on the internet and find it. That's the way the internet used to work. It's like where it was like a street address, like a URL was like a street address. It was a place that you could go and it would be the same every time you went there. Like a building is roughly the same every time you're there. Whereas now it's all just like feeds and whatever you get shown or whatever, when you can search for it and it'll just give you different like search results. So there's like monolithic things like, all right, that YouTube watch code will always work. A YouTube video stays in one place. But if you didn't save it, if you didn't save that URL, the search engines just might tell you to go fuck yourself when you go to look for it sometimes later the next day. So I think that there needs to be some mechanism by which people who have their ear to the ground in some way can leverage that legwork for the benefit of the community by saying like, all right, I did the legwork of finding this video and knowing how it's relevant to this topic. How do I get it in the list of things that are applicable to this topic? How do I convince that media umbrella to put it on their list of publicly accessible resources about this? How do we find the highest resolution footage of Alex Preddy's death? Because it's fucking lost. I so regret not downloading everything I found the day he was killed, because when I go to frame by frame and prove no, he did not pull the weapon out, I have a hard time finding footage that isn't so crunchy that it's hard to tell what's happening, even though I remember seeing it in higher definition than that. Those are all, there's this big pile of concerns, but compare that to like legacy media, which is doing nothing to address this problem. They just show you what they feel like showing you at 6 o'clock or on the homepage that day on their news website,
and then it's gone with the news cycle, and then you're like, how do I ever find that information again?
And if you missed it, you missed it. Like there's, there are times where I miss something that happens in the news cycle. I'm thankful enough now to have a Discord of people like sending me stuff, so a lot of people need to miss it for me to miss it these days. But I'm left asking the question as I grow, because I'm growing all the time. Like how do I best leverage this and to create a set of resources that's actually publicly accessible, like indexable, useful, comfortable to use in a way that people just like won't consider it a drag to use it. Like I'm not that good at graphic designer or web designer. Like this is the sort of thing that requires some organization. And that leads us back to what the first half of this conversation was about, which is like, what's fucking stop us from shutting us down if we try to do something like that, especially in my opinion, if the Republicans maintain control of Congress after the midterms, which
fortunately is a possibility.
it feels like a fucking toss-up. The betting markets seem confused, and I like looking at betting markets because financially motivated individuals tend to make more accurate predictions than people selling polling data to the public through advertiser clicks. But yeah, it does seem like a toss-up. But I'm concerned about like the safety of any type of organization effort of that sort.
But at the same time, I mean, and this is where the beauty of, you know, the initial questions that we were asking at the beginning of this conversation of like, what do we do? How does the community respond to what's going on, especially like with the narratives that are being formed against the organized community? And it's the fact that like there are so many people that are looking for direction right now that want to get involved but just don't know how to, that encompass so many different skill sets that, you know, the task isn't necessarily trying to come up with the best organizing effort or to know everything yourself. It's to identify the visions of what we need to create and then be able to put out the call for help for people to be able to fill in to be able to create those things. Like there are a number of tech projects that I can think of right now that I would want to put into action, such as like step one, build a database, throw all the information that we know of, patterns and trends for different disguises and tactics that ICE agents have been using, their vehicles, where they've been targeting, look for correlations in that, and then why not hand that over to some people that are more skilled in technology than I am to then look at the stats on all of it, look for those correlations and translate that over into like prediction models where we can then predict what's going to happen next. Like what is the trend that we need to go and follow? How do we start using that to be proactive? We don't necessarily need to know how to do everything because there are project managers who want to be involved. There are people who are web developers that want to get involved. There are graphic designers that want to get involved. They just need direction. And that's why I think like the future, the next step that we're looking at for the organizing community is like largely based in media, but also in the intersection between organizing efforts and media. Like we need media and journalism that is based around advocacy and pushing things forward, not just responding, not just like journalism in the sense of reporting, but journalism based around trying to help connect the community to organizing efforts and thinking about strategy with organizers who are operating in both ways at the same time, and then filling it in with people that genuinely want to get involved, whether it's in conversations with those of us who are already producing media so that way they can discuss their thoughts and connect with the community, or to be able to help plug them into those spaces where they can then take those unique skills that they have and develop the things that those of us that are working together to try to problem solve have created visions around, but we don't know how to create them, then they can create them. I don't know if you've ever heard of systems organizing before or not. It's kind of a niche aspect of organizing.
Nope.
So systems organizing is largely like the theory that I work around. It's like I spent years learning through trial and error, coalition building, trying to navigate community like politics and figuring out how to get organizations that advocate for the same thing but refuse to share members or resources or coordinate to finally be able to work together. And I kept pouring through all these different theories and trying all these different methods in order to figure out the best way to do it, because oftentimes you get to a certain point and then where organizations are functioning and then a few members will disagree and they'll split off and they'll form their own organizations, and suddenly you have 12 climate organizations existing within the same city, not working together, all advocating for something, but not reaching any effect. Systems organizing looks at the fact of like so much of our organizing spaces are filled with people that are just collectively trying to come together to be able to respond to something. We don't have our own structures in place that allows us to be sustained. So the idea behind systems organizing is looking at like what already exists in like organizational behavior and like organizational theories in general for like functioning groups that are successful. Like even looking at corporate strategy for like how hierarchies exist and for how roles are delegated and for like what individuals you need in certain places in order to have the most impact, such as like touching base on marketing, having people specifically in charge of business operations, people specifically in charge of internal communication, external communication, public facing relations, like building our organized spaces around structures that are known to work well so we can have more sustainability and have more of a process to how we're going about trying to be able to build things out within the community to be able to respond. If that makes sense. Like building structure within our spaces.
No, I mean, you're talking about addressing a problem that I see everywhere. You know, it's the same thing about like people not always knowing how to respond when there's like protest action, where it's like, where do we go? What do we do? Like,
Exactly.
can we get enough people to show up to this thing? Like, what do we all What do we all do? And then that comes back to this whole data organization task of like, there's lots of people
Yeah.
trying. I mean, one example of that like I think is really prominent is that there are a lot of different organizational efforts around the Epstein files because people are trying to, play their red
Yeah.
string game of like figuring out what we can figure out, where it's like, nope, same outfit. Here he is, unredacted in the background. We figured out who guy number 37 is. It's this guy or whoever. But I just haven't seen anybody put it all under one umbrella where there's all this
Yeah.
human capital, there's all this man hours that goes into it, there's all this labor that's happening, but so much of it just gets lost by these projects not being finished or just not being followed up by people. Because if we could put the man hours that exist to resist this thing into an
Mhm.
organizational structure that leveraged them more effectively, we'd be getting quite a lot done. But that is just
Yeah.
a monumental social engineering challenge. And I think that you touched on something that frustrates me about some of the ways in which people, I think, aren't so productive about this, is that, like you mentioned, like, yeah, let's look at corporate structure, let's look at like maybe some very successful machines
Yeah.
and try to emulate what's going on there, which is why, like, I run a production environment. This show that I do is not the only production environment that I run. I recently resigned from like a different production environment I was involved in just because I'm putting more time into this. And it's like, there is a utterly fascistic, like, command and control authority structure on a set, because if there isn't, then emergencies don't get handled very well, which is why executive
Yeah.
structures in government are used to handle emergencies. It's why the seat of the executive branch is in charge of the military. And it's why if it comes from the top, it goes all the way down. And if it comes from the middle, it only goes down. And then if it gets elevated to the top, then there's things that we can learn from. And then the difficult selling point is that the people who want to get together and organize and do these things are really averse to those sort of structures because they feel
And
like
that's
they,
the hardest part. Yeah.
right. And people say, like, well, I don't want somebody to be in charge. And it's like, well, if nobody's in charge, nothing will happen. So, like, how do we get people on board with the idea of, in some sense, going against their, like, more basic principles to submit to some sort of system so that we can get that level of organization for the stuff that maybe is a little safer to organize, like a
Yeah.
spreadsheet showing videos of Ice Agent doing things, because you can do that without leaving your home, and you can do that without suggesting anybody leave their home to go do anything. We're all just watching videos on the internet, nothing to see here, right? But we're doing it in a very organized way with a spreadsheet
Yeah.
or a data, bigger database.
And that's the
um
thing, is if we had a facilitation team in place, not necessarily people that are in charge in the sense of having power over everything, but rather change the way in which hierarchy is built. There's nothing inherently wrong with social structures and how we organize ourselves. It's about how they've been used in practice that makes them so malicious. Like, that's why corporations that are really successful, because the social structures exist within them. So the business processes and operations work effectively. It's just when those corporations are led by people with, horrible intentions, that it ends up becoming dangerous to the overall community. But like, what are the things that work that combat that? Like, instead of having a team of dictators at the center of everything, why not have a team of facilitators whose job it is to drive the conversations between the different committees that exist? Why not organize people who are good in tech that want to be involved in organizing efforts to form a tech team? Why not build people around creating a web development team that helps improve organizations like online presence? Why not build a team of people who have project management experience to help train up facilitators and to go out and consult different groups and help teach them skill sets that allow them to build both technical structures and social structures that allow them to respond more effectively in what they're doing? Why not? And this is honestly one of the things that I'm thinking the most about trying to form right now as I'm working towards trying to build out impulses that like Umbrella Media Network. Why not build our own think tank or multiple think tanks focused on taking the information that we're getting from the community and from the federal government, digesting that, and then being able to come up with strategy for it through an interdisciplinary lens of bringing together those who specialize in the legal side of things with those who are journalists, with those who work in organizing efforts, with those who work in entrepreneurship. So we can see everything from every angle and then be able to make decisions that allow us to be able to feed that back to those groups.
that that
Better
that
strategy because we can see it.
that gets so much to, like, the sort of thing that, like, I find myself, like, you know what happens in a think tank might happen, you know, at the bar table in a smaller capacity, because there are times where I
Mhm.
have people who are so maybe a little more in the echo chamber of protesters, maybe a little more in the echo chamber of
Yeah.
activists, where they don't spend a lot of time engaging with the people who are opposition to this thing, and they'll say, well, we need to teach them this, we need to say this, and I sit here with hundreds of hours of experience of talking to Trump supporters, and I go, no, no, that won't work. They won't like that.
Yeah.
That's not an effective way to communicate. They will not take you seriously if you say that to them. So even if you start saying stuff that's more effective after that, you'll have lost their credibility. And I can say that with some professional experience that just is drawn from like a wealth of experience of engaging with these people. Because I think that I mean, I'm just talking about myself because it's the expertise that I have in this thing, which is like
Yeah.
this messaging thing. Like I'm really working on like, how do you actually reach a Trump supporter? How do you actually get them to tell you why they're a Trump supporter in a way that's genuine and actually fucking true? Because they will just
But
lie to
that's
your face
extremely
about.
important knowledge that a lot of people don't have. And that's the thing, is that they're blindsided by that inability to have that experience behind them.
I mean, I mean, I love the idea of like pooling that knowledge into something that like lets the organizers make a more effective grassroots approach to getting the community involved. Because a lot of the time I'll talk about the sort of things that the organizers are doing, and I
Yeah.
can get somebody who supports Trump to be like, oh, that sounds great, and I'm like, right, that's what they're calling us terrorists for, you asshole. Like, come on, that's that. I just described that what we were doing without naming anybody, and you fell in love with it
Yeah.
because we're building that strong community of people, you know, trying to live their American dream or whatever vocabulary gets the chuds excited about it.
Yeah.
Because they're so lost in the messaging, they don't realize that we're just trying to fucking help each other. We're just trying to protect each other in this thing. We're just trying to, you know, get through this together. Um, but I'm really hugely interested in that idea of like growing a more organized effort to leverage the skill sets that individuals have, because there's so much
Yeah.
that I like, you know, when I see content like yours, which is a different flavor than mine, I just think like, oh my God, I wish I had what this guy has to make this sort of video that'll get out there and get so many people educated. Whereas I spend
Same. Well,
this long form effort of just sitting and doing it for hours and hours and hours a day, and every now and then, you know, that develops a clip that'll go out and a million people will see it, and I think, oh man, if only I controlled which of my clips got a million views.
and that's like the crazy thing, is like we put in so much effort into producing the things that we do, no matter what it is, whether it's media or it's organizing project or whatever. But like we are so limited by just knowing what we're good at. Like I can only speak on organizing and the journalism that I have been doing. I can't come into a conversation and talk about the legal side of things. I can't talk about how to go and live stream something effectively like Andrew Mercado does. I can't talk about like, you know, marketing aspect of it, about how to go and reach new populations in a way that uses multiple different like media formats like Monty Mater, Jolly Good Ginger sometimes end up doing. Like
Mhm.
these are things that if we came together at a table and we were able to discuss and supplement what each other is good at, or like that's just in a media scope of what a think tank could look like. But if you then you look at the organizing aspect and you bring in like the legal perspective and the marketing perspective, and you have someone who's based in your style and someone that's based in my style, and maybe someone that only knows organizing without media skills whatsoever, like those are still important perspectives, because suddenly instead of having only one background of experience in just organizing or in just media, suddenly we have five different lenses of experience that allow us to see each side, and we can talk about, this has worked for me, this hasn't worked, what works for you. If I do this, like what can we do on the legal side for that? If we do that, what can work on the marketing aspect of that? If we do this, how can the organizing effort be most amplified by the media, and how we're going about talking about it afterwards, or vice versa? If we put out a video, how can you follow that up with a really structured organizing effort that then floods people in to a call to action that they want to be involved in? Like if we're thinking about those things together and trying to problem solve them together, we're much more effective at seeing the full puzzle rather than just having the one piece that each of us holds, trying to throw it into the ring and hope that it latches on to enough people that we can do something. Like it's part of what human nature is we oftentimes organize ourselves into groups because we are so attracted to the different lifestyles that we live and the different perspectives and backgrounds that we have. And we should use that to our advantage instead of allowing it to continuously and systematically be used to go and divide us in the propaganda that comes out. Like one example being like urban versus rural spaces, two completely different experiences on life. But if you have someone from a rural space, someone from an urban space come together and talk about the issues that they face within their own communities and the hopes and dreams that they have, oftentimes they're a lot more aligned than different. And having both of those perspectives can then help you go and leverage what needs to go into those communities better than only getting one perspective. And it's like, if we can do that same thing here, or if we can do that there, then what can we do here in the organizing spaces? We're thinking through how to not only reach people, but to have impact, and not only how to have impact, but have impact from a multifaceted approach that has impact in 5 different areas that are all effective because we've worked together versus just one area that hopefully does enough of a dent before people move on to the next thing. So
I think on that note, we have our work cut out for us, and
we do, but
I'll probably be bothering you off air.
Cool.
With that said, thanks so much for hopping on. This has been a really, really awesome conversation.
Yeah, no, appreciate you having me. Being up in Alaska over the last few months and not being in Minnesota has been really hard because obviously, I guess not obvious to a lot of people, but where Alex Preddy was murdered is a few blocks away from where I used to live in the Twin Cities too. Like it hits home, and I think for a lot of us, only those of us that were on the ground during Operation Metro Surge really feel that true sense of urgency that's going on right now because we've lived through that immediate crisis. And so it's always great to be able to talk with others who were there because in that sense, there's kind of the get it.
Well, I was going to say, you and I didn't need the media to give us the impact of that time.
Yeah.
Well,
just needed the community.
On that note, I'm going to wrap the stream. I'll be doing the members only stream very soon. So if you're a member somewhere, get ready for that. It's happening at 9 o'clock in about 25 minutes. Thanks for watching, everybody. And thanks again, Lee. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
It was nice to meet you.